The letter came folded into thirds, thick with ink and the heat of summer dust, postmarked from a mining town in Wyoming territory called Ransom Hollow. It was not a place anyone returned from. Annie Blackwell didn't care. She read the words like scripture. My late wife passed in childbirth. The house is mine, the land fenced and sound. I'm needing a woman strong in back and quiet in spirit. Will provide train fare and wed on arrival. In good faith. Matthew F. Callahan. It wasn't love, it wasn't even luck. But in Missouri, Annie had nothing but a grave for her father, dirt on her hem, and an uncle who watched her too long when she bent to stoke the stove. She wrote back, yes. The train west rattled with heat and prairie silence. Annie didn't speak to the other brides. There were 5 in her car, each with ribboned bonnets and thick traveling coats, sweating under their hope. She carried one carpetbag, inside it her mother's Bible, her father's straight razor, and a photograph of herself as a child, taken before the river took her brothers and the world tilted strange. That photograph she would later burn. Ransom Hollow appeared out of haze like a scar on the earth, its buildings bleached thin by wind, the church steeple leaning like a drunkard, the mine on the ridge bleeding smoke day and night. The station master knew Matthew, told her he'd be late. A week late, as it turned out. She slept in the station office, with mice skittering in the walls and the sound of men spitting tobacco under the windows. She almost turned back, but when he came, Matthew Callahan looked cleaner than the others. Tall, bearded 30-something with eyes like soot. No smile. Just held out a hand and nodded once as if to say, "You're here, and that's the only thing that matters now." The house sat beyond the rise, hidden in pines. It was 2 stories, clapboard gray, with a well out back and smoke already curling from the chimney. "You'll find it well kept," he said. Was hers before, she liked it neat. He didn't say her name. He didn't say the child, either. The wedding was a muttered exchange in the parlor, just her and him and a minister who smelled of whiskey and didn't ask questions. They ate stew in silence. That night, he lay beside her without touching her. She learned quickly. Her chores were clear: cook clean, tend the hens, stay out of the cellar. He told her that once after showing her the house. "That door's locked for a reason. Rats down there, foul things." He said it with a tightness in his voice. She didn't push it, not then. But the cellar stairs called to her, in the way closed things do. The lock was a heavy iron thing, like a jail shackle, bolted to the outside of the door. She touched it once while sweeping the hall. Cold, even in the sunlit air. From the kitchen, she could see it out the corner of her eye, a black square in a clean house. It took 3 weeks before she heard the sound. Not rats, not water, a voice. A whisper almost, like breath sucked between teeth. It came at night when the fire burned low and the wind dipped. She told herself it was nothing. On the 4th Sunday, he rode to town. She waited until his horse's hooves faded into the woods. Then she pried at the lock. It wasn't easy. She used the forked end of a fire iron, slipped it into the hinge, wrenched until the metal groaned. She expected dust, mildew, maybe bones of animals. But when she pulled the door open, she felt it before she saw it, heat, as if the cellar breathed. The stairs creaked under her. She held a lantern. And there, in the flicker of oil flame, she saw her. A woman chained at the ankle to the support beam. Pale as wax, dressed in what had once been a nightgown. Her hair was the color of wet ash. Her eyes found Annie's and did not blink. She didn't scream. Neither of them did. Instead, the chained woman whispered hoarse, "Is he dead?" Annie said, "No, he's in town." The woman turned her face to the stone wall. Her back was raw, lashed and scarred in rows. At the edge of the room stood a child's cradle, empty. Annie dropped the lantern. The flame flared against the dirt but died fast. Her hands shook. She went to the woman and knelt, touching the chain. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman looked at her, smiled without teeth. "I'm his wife," she said, "his first." Annie stood, heart hammering. "He said you died." "I did," she said. "He just wouldn't let it take." She leaned close then, so close Annie could smell the iron and blood and silence on her skin. Don't scream, she said. He won't kill you quick if you scream. Annie stepped back. There were names scratched into the wall, not just one, 3, beneath them tally marks. She turned and fled the cellar, slamming the door behind her. The lock, broken now, hung useless. That night, she didn't sleep. The woman didn't scream. The next morning, Annie made porridge and eggs. She cleaned the parlor, she fetched water, and she planned. Because once you know there's a chain in your house, you can't forget the sound of it dragging. Not ever. And because the only way out was through. The days after were clean. Annie kept them that way. She scrubbed the floors until her hands cracked and bled, whittled her voice down to silence, and nodded when Matthew spoke, which wasn't often. He didn't notice the lock was gone, or maybe he did and didn't care. Maybe he thought fear did the same job metal used to. But Annie had grown up in the kind of fear that didn't fade, fear that became a muscle. You learned how to lift it, how to wear it like a shawl in winter. The woman in the cellar had no name, at least none she gave. Annie brought her water and bread the next morning, pretending she was feeding a dog behind the shed. The woman took the food with hands like claws, eyes sunk so far back in her skull she looked like death half-dressed, but she ate. And when she finished, she whispered, "How long you been here?" "A month," Annie said. "You." "Longer than God would allow." Annie squatted beside her, glanced at the chain. It was bolted through the wood and floor. Old, he hadn't expected it to ever break. "I'll find the key," Annie said. The woman shook her head once. "You won't, not where he keeps it." That night Annie watched Matthew undress. He folded his shirt with care, hung it over the chair, laid his belt flat across the dresser. The key hung on a ring at his neck, tucked under his undershirt. She watched the rise and fall of his breath, the way he slept like a man with nothing to fear. It made her stomach twist. The town was 13 miles. Once a week he went. Sundays, he stayed overnight. Said the trail was rough, that the horse needed rest, and the trip back too dark. That meant one day, maybe two, when the house was hers. The next Sunday she gave him coffee laced with foxglove root, not enough to kill, just to empty him out. She watched him shit himself raw behind the barn, hunched over and wheezing. "Stay," she said, helping him back into the house. "You need to rest." He grunted, waved her off. Just bad beans. She cursed at herself. One wasted week. The next, she didn't ask. She just slipped a sliver of soap into the eggs and watched him sweat. When he finally rode off, hunched in the saddle, she counted to 100 before opening the cellar again. The woman hadn't moved, just sat with her head against the beam. She didn't look up. "I can get a file," Annie said. "You'll wake him. He's gone." The woman opened her eyes. "You sure?" Annie nodded. "He'll be in town till dusk tomorrow. That's time enough." She worked for 4 hours. The iron was thick. She ruined a bread knife first, then tried a saw from the shed, but it couldn't reach. Finally, she pulled one of Matthew's files from his toolbox. The edge scraped like bone. The woman gritted her teeth and held still. Sweat ran from her neck to her waist. "You want to know my name," she said once. "No," Annie said. "If I know it, I'll mourn you." The woman smiled, the first time. By sunset, the file was worn smooth, and the chain just barely thinner. Annie closed the cellar, lit the stove, burned the blood-stained cloths. That night he returned early, smelling of whiskey and perfume. "You cook rabbit?" he asked. She nodded. "Where'd you get rabbit?" "Trapline in the east brush," she lied. He sat down, ate, didn't taste it, just chewed like a man working a job. That night he pressed her into the mattress, heavy, silent, after he rolled off, asleep in minutes. She turned her face to the wall, where the light of the moon made patterns in the wood grain that looked like mouths trying to speak. In the morning, he took his rifle and went out to check traps. She opened the cellar and went back down. The woman was pale but alive, still chained. Annie brought coffee, strong. The woman drank it, hands shaking. "You don't have to save me," she said. "I know," Annie said. "But you want to. I want to unmake him." They didn't speak after that. Some things, once named, become too real. On the 6th week, Matthew brought home a mirror, hung it in the bedroom, said something about making the place more fit for a woman. Annie watched his hands in the glass, thought about slitting his throat while he slept, wondered if she could, wondered if it would be enough. But the woman downstairs was still chained. And Annie had learned, from the long silence of Missouri nights, that revenge wasn't a matter of one clean cut. It was about waiting until the man who wronged you knew exactly what he'd lost, then cutting him slow. She began collecting things. The knife her father left her, straight razor, bone handle, still sharp. The gold coins Matthew hid in the woodbox, wrapped in oilcloth. A half-empty bottle of chloroform in the shed, with a note tied round it from some long-dead doctor. And in her mind she sketched maps of the house, escape routes, where the floorboards creaked, which doors stuck in humidity, what time the hawks circled the trees and the foxes yelped at night. She cut her hair short, tucked it under a man's cap when she snuck out to check the trail. She took meat from the smokehouse and dried it, wrapped it in cloth, buried it beneath the chicken coop. She practiced walking without sound, breathing with her mouth shut, standing still for an hour without moving. When she opened the cellar the following Sunday, she didn't speak, just showed the woman the bolt she'd pulled from the chain's anchor. The woman stared. "You're not afraid," she said. "I was, now I'm ready." The woman nodded. Then she whispered, "He kept her bones in a box. Our daughter said she never was mine." Annie said nothing, just laid a hand on the woman's shoulder. She understood now. This wasn't about saving one woman. It was about burning the whole thing down. It rained for 5 days, the kind of rain that soaked through the roof slats and turned the road to soup. Matthew stayed close during storms, didn't trust the woods when wet. He drank more, kept the rifle near, watched Annie too much and talked too little. She cooked salt pork, peeled potatoes, stitched the fraying hem of his shirt, smiled when he touched her hip, swallowed bile when he kissed her throat. At night she lay awake, counting breaths, his, hers, the cellar woman's, distant and too slow. On the 5th night, the rain stopped. The trees steamed in the morning light, and Annie knew something was coming. Not from the sky, from him. He took the shovel after breakfast, told her to clean the barn. She watched from the window as he crossed the yard, boots deep in mud, and disappeared into the trees. The same woods she'd buried the meat in, where she'd walked the trail, left tracks, cracked twigs. She felt her stomach drop. When he returned, dusk at his heels, his hands were clean, but his eyes were not. "You been out?" he asked. She shook her head. "Funny," he said, dropping the shovel. "Ground says different." She said nothing. He stepped forward. "What you doing out there, Annie?" She met his eyes, looking for berries. His mouth twitched, not a smile, something worse. "I married you to fix things, not to lie." She felt the blow coming before it landed. His hand cracked her cheekbone, sent her stumbling into the table. The copper pot fell and rolled, hissing steam on the floorboards. He didn't hit her again. Instead, he leaned close, breath full of sweat and whiskey and meat. "Don't go wandering," he said, "not unless you want a collar like hers." He left her there, blood in her mouth, and walked outside to smoke. She waited, counted the clicks of his lighter. Then she stood and went to the cellar. The woman was awake, barely. She saw Annie's face and hissed, "He knows." "I know," Annie said. "He'll move me or kill me." "Not yet," Annie said. "Not till I say so." The bolt was gone now. The chain could be lifted free. But the woman's leg was too thin, the skin too broken. She couldn't run. Annie didn't tell her that. Instead, she said, soon. That night, she wrapped a wet rag around her cheek and waited for the pain to dull. Matthew stood in the doorway, watching her. "You think I don't see it?" he asked. "That you look at me like I'm the devil?" She looked up, steady. "You are the devil," she said. He stared, then laughed, low and mean. "I could have left you to the dirt, girl. I gave you a house, a name. I'd rather have the dirt." That was the last thing she said for 2 days. He didn't touch her after that, just watched, drank, muttered to himself when he thought she was asleep. She watched him too, noted where he hid the key when he bathed, how he unbuckled the gun belt to eat, left it slung over the chair. She timed his walks to the outhouse, knew exactly how long he pissed. The morning after the rain broke, he took the rifle and headed into town. Said the mule needed shoeing. She waited a full hour, then went to the shed. The chloroform was where she'd left it, the rag too. She carried both in her apron and went to the cellar. The woman was worse, fevered, but awake enough to grip Annie's wrist. "It's time," Annie said. Together they lifted the chain, slid it over the ruined ankle. The skin peeled, but it came free. The woman collapsed. "I can't run," she gasped. "Not like this." Annie nodded. "Then we won't run, we'll make him stay." She hid the woman in the barn loft, covered her with hay and a blanket, left her food and a knife. "When I come," Annie said, "don't wait, hit him, cut deep." The woman's fingers closed around the blade. Annie went back to the house and cleaned, scrubbed blood from the floor, cooked a roast, set the table. When he returned at dusk, boots muddy and face drawn, she met him on the porch with a bottle of whiskey and a smile. "Truce," she said. He took the bottle, squinted at her, drank. "You're a strange one." "So they tell me." She waited until he drank more. Waited until the fire burned low and he laid the rifle down. Waited until he turned to piss in the hearth. Then she stepped behind him and clapped the chloroform-soaked rag to his face. He thrashed, elbowed her ribs, knocked the lantern over. The flame licked the rug. She held on. He went limp in her arms. She dragged him inch by inch through the door, down the steps. The cellar swallowed him whole. When he woke, he was the one chained. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the walls. Then he saw the names. The 3 scratched deep with fingernails, the tally marks beneath. He turned to her, mouth moving. Annie knelt. "You took them," she said, "all of them." He blinked. "They were mine." She leaned close. "So am I, and I'm taking me back." She stepped aside. The woman from the barn limped forward, knife in hand. He saw her, his face split in fear. "Sarah," he said. She didn't answer. She just raised the blade. Annie turned and climbed the stairs. Behind her, she heard the cut. He didn't scream. Not at first. But eventually, he did. And the cellar, once so silent, echoed with the sound. The blood didn't soak fast. It came in pulses, wet and stubborn, clotting where it touched old dirt and stone. Sarah cut slow, just as Annie had imagined, not to end him, no, not yet, but to make each old wound on her body a question she carved back into his. Annie didn't watch. She went to the porch instead, sat with her knees drawn up, rifle across her lap, eyes on the tree line. Coyotes yipped far off. The stars blinked open, one by one, like someone uncovering old scars in the sky. Behind her, Matthew screamed again. Sarah was not quick. She wasn't strong either, not anymore. But suffering had taught her patience, and when a woman learns how to wait in pain, she can wield it better than any blade. The first hour, Annie didn't move, let it happen. The second, she went back down. He was breathing still, eyes rolled back, teeth red. Sarah sat beside him, knife tucked in her lap like it might sing to her if she left it alone too long. She looked at Annie without guilt. I didn't finish. Annie shook her head. You don't have to, he's already dying. He's not. Sarah stood, swayed, caught herself. He's still got that look in him, the one he had when he locked the door. It's there, just smaller. Annie looked down at him. Matthew blinked once, tried to speak. His lips moved like broken hinges. Take it, Annie said. Sarah understood. She put the blade against his chest and leaned in, not quick, not deep, just enough. She let it slide into his heart like a woman returning something borrowed. When it was done, she left the knife there. He didn't move again. There was no silence like the silence that followed. Annie turned to the wall, the names carved there Sarah's, and before her Margaret and Ruth. She touched each one, then looked at Sarah. You want to keep the house? She asked. Sarah laughed once, sharp and dry. No, burn it. So they did. They dragged what they could into the yard, bedding, papers, old cloth soaked in oil. They stacked the chairs, tore the curtains, splashed kerosene over the porch. The fire caught fast. It licked the edges of the windows like a thing hungry to be let in. The roof folded inward by dawn, the walls crackled and collapsed in bursts. They didn't watch it all, just enough to know it wouldn't stop. Sarah coughed, smoke in her lungs. Her skin looked waxy in the firelight, but she stood tall, even barefoot and broken. I dreamed of this, she said. Annie nodded, me too. They didn't speak more. By morning, the land behind the house was ash. Annie dug graves anyway, not for him, for the others. She found the box Sarah had told her about, buried in the far corner of the yard beneath a stump. Inside were bones small enough to fit in one hand, a scrap of lace, a locket with no picture inside. She buried them beside each other, 3 mounds, no markers. Sarah sang something low while she shoveled. It wasn't a hymn, it didn't need to be. When the last of the grave dirt was packed, they left. They didn't take the horse, didn't want the sound of hooves, walked instead through the backwoods where the trees tangled and the sky felt far away. They reached a creek by midday. Sarah dropped to her knees, drank deep. The water turned the blood on her hands to red rivers. We need names, she said after a while. Annie looked up. New ones. No ours. Annie thought for a long time. Keep yours, she said. Let them come asking for someone who doesn't exist. Sarah smiled, then they'll find ghosts. They walked for 3 days. On the second, Sarah's fever broke. On the third, they came across a wagon trail and a man too old to aim his gun straight. He gave them bread, pointed them west. There's work at the rail camps, he said, or the canneries near Sacramento. They thanked him, walked on. They weren't in a rush. Death had moved behind them, slow as it pleased. And for the first time in years, neither woman had to wonder when it would knock. They owned the road now. They passed through one town, then another, changed dresses, cut Annie's hair shorter. Sarah learned to walk without limping. They spoke to no one about Ransom Hollow, not the cellar, not the fire. But some nights when the wind came sharp through the trees, they'd both turn at once, as if hearing a voice they knew. And neither had to say it, what they felt in the dark. That even free women remember the chain. And some nights you still feel the shackle. But that's the price of surviving. By summer's end they had reached the gold towns along the Sierra foothills, where camps sprawled wild between stunted trees and canvas shanties, and every third man carried a shovel like it might dig him into heaven. The women there were brittle-eyed, tougher than they looked, their dresses patched with wire thread. They saw Annie and Sarah and didn't ask questions. That was how you stayed safe. Don't pry, don't stare, don't guess at a woman's bruises. They found work gutting trout, then canning peaches in a heat that made the skin peel from their hands. Sarah took to wearing gloves, not to hide, just to keep from bleeding on the fruit. She didn't smile much, but her limbs grew stronger. Annie slept in short bursts, her hand still curled around the handle of her father's straight razor beneath her pallet. Each time she woke, she touched her own skin to be sure it hadn't turned back to glass. They lived like that for weeks, honest, hungry, silent, until one morning a stranger came into the cannery office. A man in a brown vest with a silver badge tucked half out of sight said he was asking after a Matthew Callahan, missing man, land burned, neighbor suspicious. Had a wife come through, he said. Young thing, black hair, crooked tooth. Might have had a woman with her, older, scar on the jaw. The foreman didn't know a thing, wouldn't have told him if he did. Too many come through, he said, all of them running from something. The man with the badge left, didn't return. But Annie heard it. The way fate still scraped at the edge of her name. They left that night. Took nothing but their coats and what silver they'd earned. Didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. They moved north into colder wind and pine deeper than any trail, camped by rivers, kept their backs to trees. Once a bear came into the clearing. Annie didn't flinch, just stood, steady, staring until it turned and vanished into the dusk. They found a cabin by accident, half buried in ivy, slouched in the earth like it had fallen asleep mid-century. No smoke, no boot tracks, just a dead coyote in the well and dust on the windows. They made it theirs. Sarah cleared the brush. Annie repaired the roof with pitch and branches. Together they built a fence, a snare line, a coop with no hens yet but a latch so tight a man's fingers wouldn't open it without blood. In that place the seasons were slow. The kind of slow that teaches you how to listen. Sarah began keeping a ledger. Not of what they owned, there wasn't much, but of what they'd lost. Not names, not towns, just scars. She wrote them down like prayers. One word per page: wrist, fire, chain, daughter, voice. She never filled it. There weren't enough pages. Annie hunted, carved with a sharpness that felt holy. Skinned deer with the blade her father left her, and cleaned each pelt with a care that made Sarah pause. "You still see him?" she asked once, late in winter, when the chimney hissed and the trees were full of weight. Annie didn't answer right away. Then sometimes I see her, the girl I was. I ask what she would have done different. She never speaks. "You think we're free?" Annie stirred the fire. "No, but I think we're no longer owned." That was enough. By spring, Sarah could laugh again. Not loud, not often. But once she saw Annie trip over a root and mutter like a drunk, and the sound she made was real. Sharp and sudden, like a nail pulled from wood. That same week they found a foal near the trail, dead mare nearby, wolves already at her flanks. Annie shooed them off with a torch and carried the foal back, fed it milk from a rag, kept it close. It lived. They named it Bramble. As it grew, so did the distance between who they were and who they'd become. No one came looking again. Or if they did, they never found the cabin. The woods held their secrets better than any town could. Years passed. Gray touched Sarah's hair. Annie's hands stiffened with the cold, but their eyes stayed sharp. Their bodies remembered the cellar, the sound of chain on wood, the way silence can hum louder than screams. They never went back to Ransom Hollow. Not even once. But every spring, when the thaw came and the river broke its crust, Annie would walk to the edge of the trees and drop something into the water. Once a bone. Once the locket. Once the old iron file that had almost set Sarah free too late. She never spoke while she did it, never prayed. Just watched the current take it. Some things belonged to water. The rest they kept. By the time strangers passed through the hills, trappers, ranchers, a preacher's son lost and bleeding, they found two women living in silence, surrounded by smoke-cured hides and a foal grown to a mean-eyed stallion. They never said what they'd seen. But word passed slow, and it passed deep. If you were running from a man, you might want to head north. Find the place where fire once walked, and two women still kept it lit. Not for warmth, for warning.